She wrapped her face in raw veal every night before going to sleep. She weighed herself 3 times a day, panicking if the number went up even slightly. At 5 feet 8 inches tall, she forced her body to stay at exactly 110 pounds for most of her adult life. Her waist measured 19.5 inches because she wore corsets so tight she could barely breathe. And when her husband gave her a sexually transmitted disease just a few years into their marriage, something broke inside Empress Elisabeth of Austria. Her obsession with staying pure, staying young, and staying perfect consumed her completely. This is the story of how one woman's desperate fight against time, aging, and reality itself ended up killing her in the most unexpected way. What you're about to hear isn't just another royal story. This is about a girl who never wanted to be an empress, who lost everything that mattered, and who tried to find control in the only place she had left, her own body. And that obsession became her prison, her purpose, and ultimately, her death sentence. Christmas Eve, 1837. A baby girl was born in Munich, Germany, to the Royal Bavarian House of Wittelsbach. They named her Elisabeth Amalie Eugenie, but everyone in the family called her Sisi. Unlike other aristocratic girls who were raised in stuffy palaces with strict rules, Sisi grew up differently. Her childhood was actually happy. She spent her days running wild through the Bavarian countryside. She rode horses without caring about proper royal posture. She climbed mountains. She wrote poetry in her journal. She didn't care about fancy dresses or jewelry or impressing anyone at court. She just wanted to be free. And honestly, people didn't think she was that special to look at. Her face was round, kind of plain. She had a sturdy, athletic build that people described as boyish. Nobody looked at young Sisi and thought she would one day be called the most beautiful woman in Europe. She was just a normal girl who liked being outdoors. But everything changed in 1853 when she was 15 years old. Her mother decided to take Sisi and her older sister Helene to meet Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria. The plan was simple. Franz Joseph, who was 23, would fall in love with Helene and marry her. Sisi was just there as a backup, a companion, someone to fill out the party. Nobody expected anything to happen with her. Except Franz Joseph took one look at Sisi and that was it. He completely ignored Helene. Within 24 hours, he decided that Sisi would be his wife, not Helene. Sisi. And nobody asked Sisi what she wanted. She was terrified. She cried. She didn't want to leave her home. She didn't want to marry this man she barely knew. She didn't want to become empress of one of the most powerful empires in the world. But it didn't matter what she wanted. Her family saw this as an incredible opportunity. Franz Joseph had made his choice. The wedding was happening whether Sisi liked it or not. On April 24, 1854, 16-year-old Elizabeth married Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria. She was shaking during the entire ceremony, overwhelmed and terrified. From that moment on, her life stopped being her own. The real nightmare started the second Sisi arrived in Vienna. Waiting for her was Archduchess Sophie, Franz Joseph's mother. Sophie was also Sisi's aunt, which made the whole situation even more twisted. This woman was known as the only man at court because she was tougher, colder, and more ruthless than most men in politics. She had controlled Franz Joseph his entire life, and she had specific plans for who he should marry. Sisi wasn't part of those plans. Sophie hated that Franz Joseph chose this wild, uneducated, peasant-faced girl from Bavaria. She made it her personal mission to break Sisi's spirit and mold her into a proper Habsburg empress. and she was brutal about it. Within 10 months of getting married, 17-year-old Sisi gave birth to her first baby, a daughter. But Sisi wasn't allowed to name her own child. Sophie named the baby after herself, Sophie. And then she did something that destroyed Sisi completely. She took the baby away. Sophie claimed that Sisi was too young, too inexperienced, too stupid to know how to raise a royal child properly. She literally took the baby from Sisi's arms and moved her into her own apartments. Sisi wasn't allowed to hold her daughter whenever she wanted. She wasn't allowed to feed her. She had to make appointments just to see her own child. And even then, Sophie was always there watching, criticizing, telling her she was doing everything wrong. A year later, Sisi had her second daughter, Gisela. Same thing happened. Sophie took this baby too. Sisi begged Franz Joseph to help her. She cried. She pleaded. She told him this was torture. And what did he do? Nothing. He told her that his mother knew best. He said Sophie had to be obeyed. He chose his mother over his wife every single time. So there Sisi was, barely 18 years old, married to a man who didn't stand up for her, controlled by a monster of a mother-in-law, and not even allowed to be a mother to her own children. She had zero power over anything in her life. She was just a body, a womb, a decorative piece for the Habsburg dynasty. And then came the betrayal that changed everything. Within the first few years of their marriage, Sisi found out that Franz Joseph was cheating on her. And worse than that, he gave her a venereal disease. The exact disease is debated by historians. Some say it was syphilis. Others think it might have been gonorrhea or another sexually transmitted infection. But what's absolutely certain is that Sisi contracted something from her unfaithful husband that made her sick. Think about what this meant for a young girl who had grown up pure and free in the countryside. Her husband, the man who was supposed to protect her, had violated her body. She felt contaminated, dirty, infected. This wasn't just about the physical illness. This was about her entire sense of self being destroyed. She couldn't control her marriage. She couldn't control her children. She couldn't even control what diseases entered her own body. For the rest of her life, Sisi became obsessed with the idea of purity, of cleanliness, of being untouched and perfect. If she couldn't control anything else in her life, she would control her body with absolute precision. In 1857, when Sisi was just 19 years old, she finally got permission to take her daughters on a trip to Hungary. For once, Sophie wasn't there breathing down her neck. For once, Sisi could actually spend time with her children and act like a real mother. She was happy for the first time in years. And then both daughters got sick. It happened fast. They developed high fevers, terrible diarrhea, and wouldn't stop crying. Sisi panicked. She tried everything to help them. Little Gisela, who was 1 year old, slowly got better, but 2-year-old Sophie kept getting worse. On May 29, 1857, baby Sophie died in Sisi's arms. She had been fighting the illness for 11 hours, probably suffering from typhoid fever or severe dehydration. Sisi held her daughter's little body and felt her go still. She was completely destroyed. The guilt was unbearable. She blamed herself. If she had been allowed to raise her daughters from the start, maybe she would have known how to protect them better. Maybe Sophie would still be alive. And the people at court made it worse by whispering that if Archduchess Sophie had been in charge, the baby wouldn't have died. Sisi withdrew from everyone. She couldn't even look at Gisela without feeling overwhelming pain. Her marriage to Franz Joseph, which was already damaged, completely fell apart. They barely spoke anymore. She fell into a depression so deep that it haunted her for the remaining 41 years of her life. And that's when the obsession with her body truly began. After baby Sophie's death, something snapped in Sisi's mind. She decided that if she couldn't be a good wife, if she couldn't be a good mother, if she couldn't have any control over her tragic life, then she would become the most beautiful woman in the world. Beauty would be her weapon. Beauty would be her identity. Beauty would give her value when everything else was taken from her. She started a diet and exercise routine so extreme that doctors today would immediately diagnose it as anorexia nervosa. At 5'8", Sisi kept her weight at 110 pounds through constant starvation. Her daily meals were terrifying. For breakfast, she might have a small cup of broth or a few sips of milk. For dinner, she would eat pressed juice made from raw chicken, raw beef, or raw venison. Basically, just the liquid squeezed from raw meat. Sometimes she ate nothing but oranges for weeks. Sometimes just raw eggs. Sometimes she would fast completely for days. After baby Sophie died, she refused to eat anything at all for several days. And this pattern repeated whenever she felt depressed or anxious. Food became her enemy, her obsession, her punishment. But she didn't just starve herself. She also exercised like a professional athlete, training for the Olympics. She installed gymnastics equipment in her private rooms, rings, parallel bars, weights, dumbbells. She spent hours every day doing grueling workouts that left her ladies-in-waiting exhausted just from watching. She did pull-ups, leg lifts, core exercises, everything. Her afternoon walks weren't gentle strolls through gardens. They were forced marches at intense speeds covering huge distances. Her companions struggled to keep up with her. She walked so fast and so far that people described it as military training rather than leisure activity. And the corsets, those horrible, painful corsets. Sisi wore corsets laced so tightly that her waist measured 19.5 inches for decades. That's the size of a young teenager, not a grown woman who had given birth to 4 children. She could barely breathe. She had to sleep in specific positions. She couldn't eat much even when she wanted to because her stomach was compressed. And she also wrapped her entire torso in wet towels to make her waist shrink even more. She was literally torturing herself every single day. If there was one thing Sisi was famous for, it was her hair, and this hair routine was absolutely insane. Her hair grew all the way down to her feet. It was thick, long, and chestnut brown. Taking care of it wasn't just time-consuming. It completely dominated her life. Every single morning, Sisi would wake up, take a freezing cold bath, get a deep massage, do her extreme exercises, and then sit down for her hair ritual. This took 3 hours. 3 hours every single day. Her hairdresser was a woman named Fanny Fefalik, and Sisi trusted no one else to touch her hair. If Fanny was sick or unavailable, Sisi would refuse to attend official state events. She would literally skip important royal duties because her hairdresser wasn't there. That's how obsessed she was. Fanny would carefully comb through all that hair, section by section, then braid it, twist it, and arrange it into elaborate styles on top of Sisi's head. While Fanny worked, Sisi would read, write letters, or study Greek and Hungarian with her tutors. She turned this daily torture into productive time because there was no way around it. But here's the really disturbing part. After every single hair session, Fanny had to collect all the hairs that had fallen out or broken during combing and show them to Sisi in a silver bowl. Sisi would inspect them carefully, her face full of anger and blame if there were too many. Fanny learned to hide some of the loose hairs under her apron with tape, so she could show Sisi a cleaner comb and avoid her wrath. Sisi herself said, "I am a slave to my hair." The weight of all that hair gave her constant headaches. Sometimes she would spend entire days lying in her room with her hair held up by ribbons, just to take the pressure off her head and let air circulate through it. Every 3 weeks, washing her hair was an all-day event. They would wash it with raw eggs and brandy, then rinse it with disinfectant solution. After washing, Sisi would put on a waterproof silk robe and walk around for hours until her hair completely dried. Fanny was paid 2,000 guldens per year just to do Sisi's hair. That's the same salary as a university professor. And the braided hairstyles Fanny created became so famous that women all across Europe tried to copy them. Sisi's skincare routine was just as extreme and honestly kind of horrifying. Every night before bed, she would wrap her face in a mask lined with raw veal. Yes, raw meat directly on her skin. She believed this would keep her face young and prevent wrinkles. She did this every single night for years. During the day, she would crush fresh strawberries and smear them all over her face, neck, and hands. She took long baths in warm olive oil to keep her skin soft. She only washed her face with distilled water because she thought regular water would damage her complexion. She refused to use pillows when sleeping because someone convinced her that sleeping flat would preserve her beauty. At night, her servants would massage her entire body for a long time, then wrap her in cloths soaked in violet or cider vinegar. They would wrap her neck separately in towels soaked in special toning water. All of this was supposed to keep her skin tight and youthful. In her later years, the obsession got even worse. She started weighing herself 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. If her weight went up even a little bit, she would panic and fast for days. And here's the saddest part of all this. After she turned 32 years old, Sisi refused to sit for any more portraits or photographs. She was so terrified of people seeing her age, so obsessed with being remembered as forever young and beautiful, that she wouldn't let anyone capture her real appearance anymore. All the portraits of older Sisi that you see are actually just copies of paintings made when she was younger. She wanted the world to remember her as eternally youthful, eternally perfect, eternally pure and untouched by time. She was trying to stay a virgin in the sense of being untouched, untouched by aging, untouched by reality, untouched by the passage of time itself. In 1858, Sisi finally gave birth to a son. They named him Rudolf, and he was the heir to the Austrian throne. This should have been a moment of joy, but once again, Archduchess Sophie and Franz Joseph took control of Rudolf's upbringing. Sisi was pushed aside as a mother yet again. Rudolf grew up lonely, intelligent, and liberal-minded. He wanted to modernize Austria. He wanted freedom of the press, better rights for citizens, and progressive reforms. But his father was extremely conservative and traditional. They clashed constantly. Rudolf felt trapped by the expectations of being crown prince. He felt like his life wasn't his own, that he was just a puppet in a system he couldn't change. He struggled with depression. He had affairs. He contracted a venereal disease at some point and passed it on to his wife, Princess Stephanie of Belgium, making her unable to have more children. His marriage was miserable. His relationship with his father was broken. He felt like there was no escape from his life. In late 1888, 30-year-old Rudolf met a 17-year-old baroness named Marie Wetzera. They started a passionate affair. Marie was young, romantic, and completely infatuated with him. And Rudolph was so desperate to escape his life that he made a terrible decision. On January 30th, 1889, Rudolph took Marie to his hunting lodge in Meierling. That night, he shot Marie in the head while she slept. Then he turned the gun on himself. The news broke across Europe like an earthquake. The court tried to cover it up, claiming Rudolph died from an aneurysm or heart attack. But the truth came out. The Crown Prince of Austria had murdered his teenage mistress and then committed suicide. The scandal was massive. When Sisi heard that her only son had killed himself, part of her died too. She dressed in all black for the remaining 9 years of her life. She became even more withdrawn, even more obsessed with exercise and starvation, even more desperate to maintain perfect control over her body because everything else in her life had fallen apart completely. She wandered across Europe, traveling constantly, never staying in one place. She walked for hours and hours every day. She barely ate. She looked like a ghost dressed in black, haunting the cities she visited. She told people she wished someone would assassinate her. She was ready to die. She wanted it to end. September 10th, 1898. 60-year-old Empress Elisabeth was walking along the shore of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. She was traveling under a fake name with just one lady-in-waiting, trying to be anonymous for once in her life. An Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini was in Geneva that day. He had come to assassinate a different royal, but that person canceled their trip. Lucchini was frustrated. He had traveled all this way and wanted to kill someone important to make a political statement. So he decided to kill whatever aristocrat he could find. He saw Sisi walking toward the dock where a steamer ship was waiting. He walked up to her casually, and with a thin metal file that he had sharpened into a weapon, he stabbed her directly in the chest. Sisi fell to the ground, but then something incredible happened. She got back up. She kept walking. She made it all the way to the steamer ship, walked up the boarding ramp, and only then did she faint. Her companion noticed a tiny spot of blood on Sisi's white bodice. They thought maybe she had just been punched or bruised. They carried her off the ship to a nearby hotel. That's when they realized she had been stabbed. And by then, it was too late. Sisi died at the hotel. Later, doctors did an autopsy and were completely shocked. The weapon had broken her 4th rib, pierced straight through her lung, penetrated her heart from top to bottom, and exited through the lower part of her left ventricle. This was a fatal wound. Anyone else would have died instantly, bleeding out in seconds. But Sisi didn't. She walked almost 100 meters before collapsing. Why? Because of that corset. That 19.5-inch corset, laced so tight for so many years, had compressed her torso so severely that it actually slowed down her bleeding. It acted like a pressure bandage, keeping the blood inside her body just long enough for her to keep walking. The very thing she used to torture herself for decades, the symbol of her obsession with perfect beauty, kept her alive for a few extra minutes. The corset that represented her prison became her final cage. Empress Elisabeth of Austria spent her entire adult life trying to stay pure, perfect, and untouched. She wanted to freeze herself in time as a young, beautiful woman forever. She wanted control over something, anything, because everything else had been stolen from her. But in her desperate attempt to control her body, she destroyed herself. She starved until she was skeletal. She exercised until she was exhausted. She suffocated herself with corsets. She isolated herself emotionally from everyone. She lost her children, one to illness, one to suicide. She lost her marriage. she lost her freedom, and in the end, she lost her life to a random attack that might not have been fatal if she hadn't been wearing that torturous corset. Sisi's obsession wasn't really about beauty. It was about trauma. It was about a young girl who was forced into a life she didn't want, who had everything taken from her, who was abused and controlled and trapped. The only thing she could own was her body. So she controlled it with brutal precision, and that control killed her. Her story is heartbreaking because it's still relevant today. How many people are still fighting against their own bodies? How many are still starving themselves, punishing themselves, destroying themselves because they feel powerless everywhere else? How many are still chasing impossible standards of perfection because they think that's the only way to have value? Sisi teaches us that beauty isn't power when it becomes a prison. Purity isn't freedom when it becomes an obsession. And perfection isn't worth your life. She deserved so much better than the life she got. She deserved to stay free in those Bavarian mountains. She deserved to raise her own children. She deserved a husband who loved and protected her. She deserved to grow old without fear. But instead, she became a slave to her own reflection. And that's the real tragedy of Empress Elisabeth of Austria